Good evening, everyone. My name is Kulvinder Kaur Dhew, and it gives me great pleasure to host tonight's online instructor presentations on behalf of Peters Valley School of Craft. And on behalf of the entire staff and board directors, thank you so much for joining us. We have an amazing lineup of 6 presentations tonight, and an extra thing, we had the metrics today, and so far it seems that we have reached over 1,000 people during our online initiative. So that makes us feel so good about this period of time where there's not always good news, but this is fantastic news. So thank you so much for all of you who are joining us. Be sure to let us know where you're joining us from in terms of location, and include it into the chat box, which is in the menu below if you're joining us from Zoom. So welcome. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our first artist presenter, Mr. David Abeel. David was born and raised in Henrietta, New York. He graduated from St. Lawrence University with a BA in history and a Master's in social work from the University of Washington. He moved to Traverse City, Michigan, where he did 40 years of fundraising and management for a variety of charitable causes. David currently works crafting wooden weather vanes and Windsor furniture and teaching at schools, colleges, and art centers across Eastern and Midwestern USA. Welcome, David.
Thank you. I'm going to zoom right over here to our screen share. And I'm talking to you to, whoops, let's see if we can get it to come up here. There we go. Come on. There we go. I'm calling you from Traverse City, which is about 13 hours drive to Peters Valley, and I missed being there this week teaching Windsor chair classes. It's functional art, and so it's interesting that not only requires issues of beauty and symmetrical and proportion, but it also requires us to find something that's comfortable and functional. So those are interesting requirements to add to other sorts of considerations when you're critiquing art. Today in my 9-minute presentation here, we're going to look at a few things that you can make in a 3-day class, things you can make in a 2-day class. I have 5 days there at Peters Valley, and so we do a 3-day followed by a 2-day immediately. My list for what makes the perfect Windsor chair will be shared, and my list of secrets to chair comfort. Of course, every artist, every chair maker has an opinion about this, but I'll be sharing my list. And we'll peek at a couple of simple, effective tools that you'll be using when you take chair class. And then my final item will be how to find a bit of immortality when you craft your furniture. Those artists who are watching, of which there are many here, I'm sure know what I'm kind of hinting at. But gee, in 9 minutes, that's pretty good. We're going to cover a lot of ground. The definition of Windsor furniture is slab and stick construction. This is a very simple idea to describe Windsor. But you can see we have a slab of wood here in this cradle, and all of these sticks above and down below are all fastened into that stick. We don't have 2 big back posts. We don't have a box construction. It's all about this slab of wood holding all of this rest of the structure together. Windsor furniture has been around for 200 or 300 years as we currently know it, so it's well tried and true. If you take the 3-day class, this is one of the options you can select to make in class will be a rocking chair. And I love Windsor because you can use all kinds of indigenous materials to get to the goal line. Here we have lots of cherry, some white oak, another piece of cherry, down below some cherry legs, but we also have ash for our stretchers. Another 3-day item that you can select from would be an armchair. And again, we have white pine seat, some interesting character here. We have a couple knots. This is a nice piece that a student made last summer. Here's another piece. This is another option that you have in our 3-day class. It's a settee. And we've designed it so that it has some gaps here in the pattern of spindles in the back so that the two sitters on either side will be able to rest in there without something poking. Very comfortable. She did a great job. This particular student, I don't think had any background or experience working in a wood shop. She worked very hard for 3 days, and this was at Peters Valley. She did a great job. Nice outcome. And I'm gonna go ahead, now these are 2-day classes. One of your options in the 2-day class is to go for a side chair. No arms, but basically the same pattern that we had for our rocker and for our armchair. We want something that's comfortable. And so again, we have that center spacing. We have an even number of spindles. Traditionally, Windsor chairs have an odd number of spindles, 7, 9, 11. In this case, we have 10. And so we can leave that center spindle out, and I think it's much more comfortable. There's good engineering here and joinery, the types of woods that are used. These are all traditional things that were figured out hundreds of years ago to make a very light, both visually and physically, light chair. You don't want heavy, clunky furniture. The legs are splayed, so it's not tippy. And they aren't splayed too much though, because then you start tripping over it every time you walk by the chair. So not tippy or not trippy. You can judge it from a sense of beauty or proportion, but you also can judge it in terms of will it outlive me? And that's where we start to get towards that idea of a little bit of immortality. As you can see, our students are all over the map here. We have a student that's probably well over 6 feet, and then we have one who's probably around 5 feet. And all of them, I don't think, had any background in terms of woodshop work, but they all did a great job on their project. This is another 2-day project, and we're looking at tall stools. Very few folks have dining room tables anymore, and so a tall stool that's comfortable and wide, that you can eat breakfast or eat at the kitchen island is really a very popular piece of furniture nowadays for classes. Here we have a couple of pieces of poplar. I just wanted to show you the green streaks in there, kind of cool. And this is another piece of white pine where we have some blue streaking out towards the edge. These three, this person's over 80, a good friend of mine, Elsie, and they did a great job. We also are another popular item right now, and this is another 2-day project, would be making what I call backdoor boot benches. And so you can have a back, in this case, a little piece of spalted maple. And this is white pine in the seats with some blue streaks, but we also can have a natural edge and without a back. That's another option. This is Will McDonald, who was my student assistant last summer in the wood shop. Very talented woodworker, very nice guy. And we had him start right away on making a boot bench. And you can see he did some interesting things with carving kind of a patina here on the bottom, and then he used some milk paint. This was the final bench that he came up with, using a piece of spalted maple from the Peters Valley supply that they have there in the wood shop. And we put this in the auction, and it did very well. So salute to Will McDonald. Here we go. We have a bunch of people who have used that same idea that there are voids, there are knots. This got kind of had the end chewed off. We had another knot here. All of these pieces of maple or walnut made for some very attractive boot benches. And again, the variety of this 16-year-old over here on my right, he was probably the most talented person in the class. He was very, very good. There's no prerequisites to take them. This is the Travisher. We're gonna just show you a couple of tools that possibly will be used. They're very intuitive. They're not complicated. All you have to do is press on the nose of the tool, and this curved blade begins to sprue out all of these shavings. It's really fun to carve your seat. And I prefer a compass plane over the use of an adze, because the compass plane, again, has a curved bottom, a narrow blade. It's not hard to push, and is much safer than swinging something that kind of looks like an axe. These are tenon makers. They're also referred to as rounders in England. I just call them pencil sharpeners, and they work exactly the same way. We're just gonna, here's the wide end, here's the narrow end. We're gonna push in a stick, a chair leg or a spindle, and out it comes at a very precise diameter. My ideas for for building comfort into a chair is having some flexibility. So I don't tie the arm into the back spindles. And this allows these guys, these 10 here, to work together and flex just a little bit. Because they're thicker at the bottom, they won't bend as much. Because they're thinner at the top, they will bend more. And so you're going to be able to get a little bit of lumbar support. That's pretty important for chair comfort, I believe. Spindle spacing, I like to put them on 1-inch centers in the back here, so they kind of work together as a team. I'm also very hesitant on horizontals. I find that no matter where you put the horizontal, if you bring this arm and bring it right on through all these spindles back here, it's either too high or too low for most sitters. And so I just eliminated that, built in some extra strength so that we've got plenty of support, but we have a lot more comfort, I believe. Feet to floor length is important. We're going to cut this so that your legs don't dangle. That's very important. Center gap for the spine, we already mentioned that. The angle of the back, I drill these at 10. We cut the back leg 1 inch shorter than the front leg, so that adds another 3 degrees. So we get about a 13-degree total. I'm going to finish up here real quick. This is the next generation of crafters. We need to keep them in mind. This is a cute little guy that came and visited our class up in Grand Marais, Minnesota. And in terms of immortality, craft something that you will be a proud creator. It will comfort you every day. Enjoy its service to you. A little wear and tear over time will only give it more character. And when it's time, give yourself a little bit of immortality. Pass it along to a friend or the next generation. This is my granddaughter, by the way. And thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, David. That's stunning, beautiful work. Wow. Really, we're missing everyone here at the Valley. Gosh. Our next presenter is Wendy Wise. Wendy is an artist and a weaver who uses natural dyes that she cultivates and collects locally. She's a recipient of 2 Nebraska Arts Council Artist Fellowships and a Winter Tour Residential Fellowship. Her work has been exhibited throughout North America, Europe, and Asia, and she's the senior editor for the Textile Society of America and former board member and Professor Emerita of Textile Design at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. She teaches workshops on creative applications of warp ikat and natural dye. Additionally, she actually collaborates with Kramer on a range of installation projects. Welcome, Wendy. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm really thrilled to be here. You'll meet Jay in a little while tonight. I'm going to be talking about work from 2012 forward, mostly my ECOT work, but I wanted to start with this particular piece because it is natural dye on monofilament. And we showed it recently in Seward, Nebraska. It originally looked like this. It was a collaboration with Jay, and this part of the collaboration was called Core Issues. It's double woven and tubular, about 100 feet long, and I felt like I needed to strengthen my core, and I thought, well, if a 20-foot intestine is good, then 100 foot's even better. So that was a collaboration from 8 years ago. And next I want to tell you a little bit about ECOT because that's really where my attention is now. This piece takes us up to 2020. It's dyed with natural dyes, madder root, which I grow in my own garden here in Lincoln, Nebraska. The words you can see are defy, tyranny, envy, liar, king. I'll let you interpret that as you wish, but I will say that I been working with 4-letter words since 2016. ECOT is the process of resist dyeing the yarn before it is woven. And in my case, I resist dye the warp threads that go on the loom. So on the left screen, you can see that the threads are stretched out in front of me, and I will begin binding them with the pattern that will eventually read defy tyranny. And on the right, you can see the project that actually is in the show at Peters Valley, the instructor's show, and this says Lyre, and it's a much narrower weaving, but you can see the cotton binding in place there. Then after I finish the binding, I dye it, and here you see the red and white of the madder root, and it's strung up on the back of the loom here, that I'm winding it onto the back, and you have to be very methodical as a weaver and organize the structure, and then the loom and the process do all the work for you if you set yourself up well. Here I'm still rolling it onto the back beam and trying to keep the threads in order and not breaking them. The next step is going to be to thread the loom. The metal is the harnesses that raise and lower the threads. I work on a 20 harness Maycomber, which I devote typically 16 harnesses for the pattern and 4 harnesses for the selvage. So unlike traditional ikat that's woven in a simpler structure, I like to combine weave structure with the dyed pattern. And then one of the things that I learned when I was on a Fulbright in India studying ikat from an artist's perspective is that in order to align your threads, there's a tie that you make on the warp and try and get that lined up properly. Weavers in the audience will know that we're trying to get even tension, but actually for ikat, we want alignment. We're looking for alignment even more than tension. Now I'm taking you to 2016, where I created this weaving while I actually was in India on the second Fulbright and learned how to dye black using iron. And the image is based on the experience that I had when I went to Poland to teach ikat and natural dye at the Strumiński Academy in Łódź. Jay and I were staying in a portion of town that was the ghetto, the Jewish ghetto during the war. And when the Nazis took over the town, they renamed it Lichtenstadt after a general from World War I. And of course, this was incredibly moving. And when Jolanta Rudzka-Habisak invited me to create something for the Triennale in Łódź, I decided to use that as my imagery. And it was a major challenge technically to do, but very engrossing and interesting. And it's woven, you can see that this grid pattern is like a fence, and that's the idea. So following that weaving, I was thinking about all the literature I was reading about people who had been forced into camps and the many acts of resistance in the communities. And so I decided that resist would be the next word that I used. This was early in 2016 when I did this weaving. But as you can see, it applies today just as much as it did in the 50s, in the 1940s. Then in May of 2018, as I was beginning to design the next piece, in the news, we kept hearing about the border between Gaza and Israel. And there was a lot of protests going up to the fence there, and many Palestinians were killed and injured. And I was disturbed at hearing the news and decided that we're really experiencing a great humanitarian crisis, and we have to attend to the scarring, the camps, and Gaza. So that's what inspired this particular weaving. By the way, the plant matter here is weld, which is another dye plant I grow in my garden, and it's dyed on cotton. This is a collaboration that Jay and I made about 1.5 years ago for the Museum of Nebraska Art that was part of an exhibition about the Platte River. And Platte, as you might imagine, is a French word that means flat. And when the French came to this area, they discovered that the Oto Indians called the river flat in their own language. So I was able to use a 4-letter word for this, and it's to talk about the river. And then the legs, Jay might talk about, I'm not sure, but they are the legs of the sandhill cranes, which migrate over the Platte, and it makes an incredible sight in the springtime. And here's a close-up of the actual weaving. This is an ECOT to create the text, and then I used ECOT inspired ideas to play with the color and get the light and dark color effect on that weave structure. And then together we built the platform. The Platte River is a braided river, and so I wanted the platform to look like the braiding of the river. Last year, I did a series of 3 weavings called Who's Free. They're small, only 15 by 15 inches, but you can see in this one, there's 3 colors in the warp, and that's requires more care and binding and unbinding and rebinding and dyeing. So this, while it's small, it was quite labor and time intensive. And then the text, the Who's Free, is brocaded on top. And I think this is also in the show. Then I have a short little video to show you weaving, so you can see how thrilling it is for me as a weaver to have those threads go up and down and see the pattern. You can see the dyed threads, and this one is silk, so it's very fine work and very time consuming to weave even just a little inch. And the weaving itself, it says lyre. I was able to design it so that I had a cotton warp and the silk warp with the same binding. And I want to point out to the woodworkers here, I just bought these new shuttles. They're very slim and they're handmade by a woman, handywoman.com, I believe is her name, and they're just wonderful to work with. And finally, I want to thank you and show you a little bit of the garden where I get my natural dyes. So those are cosmos flowers, which I collect every morning, and they make a beautiful orange. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Your work is incredibly poignant. The messaging is subtle at the same time as being pretty fiery. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So our next guest for tonight's presentation evening is Mr. Jay Kramer, who Wendy referenced. And Jay is a sound artist, sculptor, and musical instrument inventor. He has toured across Europe, North America, and China. In 2019, he toured Mexico, performing with Albert de Kramer. In 2011, he was a finalist in the International Guthmann Musical Instrument Invention Competition at Georgia Tech. He is certified to teach deep listening and has led musical instrument invention workshops internationally, most recently at the Museum of Antique Toys in Mexico City. In 2013, he was a Fulbright Senior Research Scholar, creating a video document about the brass and drum street wedding bands in India. Welcome, Jay.
Hello. Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Good. I'm starting my timer. So, the way I like to work, and this is what I would have taught, has a lot to do with immediate experience and then integrating into integrated into it like an improvised performance or an extended improvisation where you construct something that responds as the experience changes, but always goes back to the initial experience. So the piece that Wendy and I did in the Museum of Nebraska Art had a lot to do with our experiences with the sandhill cranes at the river, but also the space that we were given in the museum. So we responded immediately to that, but then extended that immediacy to the process of making the thing itself. So as an improviser, when I'm playing music, it's always what just happened and what's an appropriate response or a working response to what just happened and what I do now. And it incrementally moves forward in time and it's almost immediate. In making things, instruments, artwork, it has more to do with listening to the materials. So it has to do with what can this stainless steel bowl do in relationship to this goofy, spiny candle holder. And it evolves from there. So what I want to do is show you some instruments I've made and then talk more about this relationship between the moment and making, which was what I would emphasize in my workshop. So I'm going to share a screen here. There's going to be a lag time. Sorry about it. It's a COVID lag. So this is an instrument made with a long spring and a bass string and a guitar pickup.
I don't think we can hear that. Is there
You
any
can't
way?
hear it?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it's not on at the moment.
Thank you.
No problem.
I guess you have to turn that on every time. Well, naturally it's disappeared. Oh, here we go. Sorry. This one's, there we go. I'll shut up. You'll notice the family resemblance between these instruments. So you can see some of the range of what I'm up to. And for me, it's important to discover an evolving bass, as in B-A-S-E, not B-A-S-S, to build on the next. I used to build, use as a platform to build the next instruments from. So basically I have three basses. One of them is the hollow core door and that table-like instrument you saw. I found a hollow core door on the street, a block away from home, and brought it home and started playing with it. And I thought, it was old, it was probably from the 50s. I thought, well, if a Gibson 175, one of the best jazz guitars, has a plywood top, beautiful old plywood on a hollow core door might function, and it did. So I made a square piece and started performing with it. And then the piece that you saw that I was playing on, that was shaped as a door, or was obviously from a door, was later shaped to fit the inside of a suitcase I had, so I could take it easily on a tour in Europe. Played a bunch of shows there. Another bass, I happened upon part of a gym floor that was being removed in a small town in Nebraska. So I bought a lifetime supply of maple. And for a while, part of that was flooring in my former studio, which burned 3 years ago. And now it goes into that form you see repeated. That's a maple slab with a circular end. And I've mounted lots of different sound makers onto that form. And it's holding up for me. And I have notes for more to come. So that's coming up. And the other one is the flexible, basically a tent pole, which was an example was the Tall Boy, which showed up as a silent image. And that was one I had success with and was in the Guthman musical instrument competition. Did not win, but it's part of a family of instruments like that. And those are social instruments, which brings me to another kind of material, which is the social interaction that happens when you play music. So my social instruments are playable by more than one performer at a time. And the way they're constructed, any motion that a performer takes on the instrument affects the sound that's possible with the other people playing. So usually it's three people, and it becomes a dance, really. And I think that dance relates strongly to the way I experience materials in the world and the possibilities of them becoming instruments. And I want to strongly include the social element of that. So one thing I learned when I taught at Peters Valley, we had a performance scheduled for lunch on the last day, and we had worked all week, and the last of the instruments to be completed was finished 30 minutes before the performance. Now, since we'd been listening to each other all week, it was as if we'd been practicing. And what happened was the performance came off really well, which surprised me because it hadn't sunk into me that that could work. And working together in whatever form leads to a strong collaboration musically and sound-wise. I've reached my 10-minute point. Thanks. Great to be here. Wish I was there physically.
Thank you so much, Jay. We wish you were here too. The music is so kind of makes me think of music that you might hear in outer space. It's ancient and futuristic at the same time.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next presenter for tonight is Mr. James Viste. James was raised on a farm in Wisconsin. He received a BA from the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse and an MFA from Cranbrook Academy of Art. He has worked for studios throughout Minnesota, Wisconsin, New Mexico, Michigan. He's currently the manager of Edgewise Forge, LLC, and recently left his position as an instructor technician at the College for Creative Studies in Detroit, Michigan, to move back to Wisconsin. In addition to teaching workshops here at Peters Valley, he serves on the board of directors. Welcome, James. Good to see you. Hi. If you can hear us, James, could you unmute?
Yep, I just got it. Thank you. And share screen. Hello. Welcome to, or hello from the frozen tundra of Wisconsin in my new shop. Definitely a work in process. If this week had been normal, I would have been teaching a pattern welded steel for objects class at the Valley. It has not panned out that way, but I'm going to share some images of some work. Since I would have been working in the blacksmith shop, I'm only going to show work that is based in steel. I do work in non-ferrous and do a lot of raising of vessels. I'm going to start out with some steel vessels from over a period of time. I like to work a lot in mimicking other materials, leather, clay, fabric. So a lot of vessels, most of them functional, all of them lined with a copper liner that is tinned so they can be cooked in. Some pattern welded steel is a little bud vase. So that's wrapped with a piece of pattern welded steel, not your traditional polished blade form, but using it in a different way. I do a lot of die forging, like you would do with a plaster mold and clay, and except I make the die out of steel and then hammer hot steel into it. So this is a vessel that was based on a farm experience. So there's corn in the husks and tractor tracks and a disc in the spoked wheel of a harvester. I really enjoy, as Albert Paley would put it, the plasticity of the material when it's hot. This is a little squashed vase, part of a series. I just loved how that material just bends to the will of another piece of the material when one's hot and one's cold. A little sake service based on the same idea. A lot of forging, a lot of fabricating. I'm not a purist. I also enjoy taking industrial materials and altering them. So these, what I call little Spock ears, are actually channel iron that was twisted upon itself and then cut down the middle. It opens up into these forms and applied it to these vessels. This is chain. I just love, I think texture is incredibly important in any surface you work in. But this is just chain that was wound upon itself and then forged flat. There's a detail of how the links conform to each other, and love working with patina and putting texture on things. Another die forging. These little scutes like a turtle would have are forged into a die I made on a milling machine and then fabricated together and into this little lidded vessel. Taking random things, bits of metal. This is kind of, it reminds me of grape nut cereal or a kind of a granola bar, forged onto this plate and then cut up and fabricated into this vessel. These are all around 10 inches tall. The detail of the lid with a little forge welded screen wrapped around the handle. A little segue, I do a lot of commission work, especially now that I'm not at the school. So this is while I was at the school, and now I'm taking on some jobs here. This is a fireplace I did years ago for an Eldon Dhew house. So if anybody is aware of Eldon Dhew's architecture, it's very modernist. But the owner of the house had a huge collection of African wood carvings, Dogon doors and things. So he wanted something to match that. So this was based on a traditional Dogon door wood carving. This was a garden screen door where if you open the door, you would see a perspective of a wall and some shelving. So I mimicked that. And then right outside the door are rhododendron plants that blossom. So in that perspective of the wall, there's rhododendron leaves and then removable blossoms of the rhododendron. So we can take them out when the plants aren't blossoming and put them in when they are. I worked a lot with other artists. This was a job through a company called Stefani and Company in Auburn Hills, Michigan, for the Michigan State University campus, an ongoing project that they're still working on. But I did a lot of the fabrication and forming for these gates, especially the upper ribbon. This was at the actual party when they were celebrating them being done. That upper ribbon and all these pipes were all fabricated in my shop and pressed and formed and fit together. Interesting work, fun project. Commissions for other residences in Detroit. These were some gates, and there was a pedestrian gate to go with them. These are the automotive, based on the finger jointing in the brickwork of their front bay windows. So I just cut and fit all that steel together, so it's real nice shadow play, and it reacts on both sides equally. This is an interesting job, recreation of a railing that was stolen by a contractor from the Detroit Institute of the Arts Museum. He was hired to refinish it and disappeared, and they gave me a picture of it and said, "Can you make it again?" Happily, they sued him and got part of it back, and I could use that to make the parts exactly as they were, but quite a set of pickets and quite a lot of running up and down the stairs putting that in place. More to the point, is the plumb bob. Damascus steel, pattern welded steel, it depends where you are from and what you call it, is just a layering of different types of carbon steels together. This is a piece that was turned on the lathe, showing that it's like wood grain when it's turned. It's made with a hammer, or you can make a hammer out of it. This is just a layered piece. We use this actually for an advertisement for Peters Valley every so often. This class would have been pattern welded steel basically for non-knife making, but everybody in the class sooner or later wants to make a knife. So I'm going to finish it off with a run of some knives here. This is just a detail of an early commission, where I kind of started with these resin handles. The person who commissioned it wanted a blade to represent himself for when he has parties. He's a pretty big collector, so I had him give me a bunch of notes from his observations of collections at other collectors' houses. Then I shredded those up and put those in the handle. It was interesting to read him. He was basically like writing down what all they had and comparing to his. He commissioned me also for a cake knife. So I made this one. The pattern is based on the layers of cake and frosting, and then the handle is layers and layers of the tongue twister. Betty beat a bit of butter to make a better batter. It just becomes kind of digitized as it's layered in the epoxy resin. I really think that the handle is where you sign your knife. So I do a lot of kind of my own custom materials, kind of collect. I won't say that I'm a hoarder, but I do collect things with the intention of making a knife. This was some colored screening from a bag from a gift bag from a wedding I went to in Greece. So that's good to take home. This is old calendars from a welding supply. If anybody has old school plastic Venetian blinds, that hexagonal tube you turn to adjust the blinds is actually hollow and makes a great kind of honeycomb pattern. Red plastic tubing from a cockroach bait dispenser. That is the core of a cash register roll. PVC tubing that just kind of falls into place. Commissioned to make a knife with little babies in the handle. People want strange things, but that was for one of our faculty who had a big party every year, and he wanted this to be his serving piece for cutting up deep fried turkeys. If anybody ever pays attention to the inside of security envelopes, there's some amazing graphic design in there that's highly unappreciated. That's layered together of a woven print. Shredded credit card, amazing. But watch out when you shred it. It's magnetic and they fly around inside your shredder pretty bad. But that was a fun pattern. I've been collecting credit cards for years to match colors. Shredded money. This is some reflective tape ribbon I found in the trash after an exhibition in our gallery. Applied that to several different handles. Here it is in more of a straight line to match the straight line of the pattern of the blade. This was some shredded black plastic and a blade made up of remnants of other blades to create that sort of random pattern. Bamboo sticks from a little birdhouse that I found in the trash. Again, not a hoarder. It's all very well organized. This is called Fordite, which is layers of paint off of the spray room walls from the Ford plants in Detroit. You can buy it in sheet, in bulk. They harvest it and sell it from the spray booths. I'm going to finish off with this. Was a commission set I just made for a couple and a collector where he is right-handed and loves the color yellow, and she is left-handed and loves the color red, and they get to share the knives and whatever color is in the palm of their hand when they're using them, and that is how they get along. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to the rest of the lectures.
Thank you so much, James. Wow, your sense of design and your humor, close to perfection. Thanks.
Thank you.
Great. Our next presenter for tonight is Mr. Timothy Jacobson. Timothy has been a photojournalist and a freelance photographer for almost 30 years. He grew up outside of Chicago and graduated from Winona State University with a BA in mass communications. A desire to tell stories with photographs and a passion for the outdoors fuel his desire to create new and inspiring images. Based out of Frederick, Maryland, he has done work for the Washington Post, the Associated Press, and Niche magazine, to name a few. Currently, he's a lecturer at Hood College and the University of Maryland's Philip Merrill College of Journalism, teaching multimedia, journalism, and photography. Welcome, Timothy.
Thank you, everybody. Man, I want to have you introduce me for everything.
Thank you.
Hi. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. I wish I was up in Layton teaching this class. Unfortunately, we're not. We'll get back there someday. I'm going to get right into sharing my screen and showing photos. I've been doing a lot of stuff in black and white lately. I don't know why. I sometimes go through patterns where I'll do a lot of stuff in black and white. I'll do a lot of stuff in color. And I get kind of caught up in doing things in motion or photos that show motion or stop motion. A lot of different things. When you've been doing photography as long as I do, you need a lot of personal inspiration. So I've been doing a lot of different things in black and white, not shooting in black and white, but changing them to black and white in either Lightroom or Photoshop. And the class that I usually teach at Peters Valley is a landscape class, how to get better landscape photos and how to teach people how to use different camera exposure combinations to get better landscape photos. The first photo is from, it's outside a little town called Lone Pine, California, and it's at the base of Mount Whitney. And the place we're at is Alabama Hills recreation area. Mount Whitney is this peak right in the background. When we went in December, Mount Whitney was closed because it tends to snow, and they don't want people driving up there. So we spent a lot of time in the lower hills and all around. Did a couple things over in Death Valley, which if you ever want to go out west, please go to Death Valley. It's unbelievable. Just don't go in the summertime. So this was just an image that I really played off the high contrast of the time of day. It was late in the day. And there's a technique in Lightroom and Photoshop where you can adjust the density of different color channels, whether it's the blues, magentas, cyans, yellows, greens. So I just was doing a lot of work playing off those color channels, darkening the blues to get a nice kind of dark blue sky, kind of opening up some of the yellows and then really saturating the image up, not saturating, kind of bumping up the contrast to play off all these really deep shadows in this super fine rock. Oops, why won't you? I have to go that way. All right, there we go. This is also out west. This is in a place called Fossil Falls Recreation Area, and this is all volcanic rock. It's an area that was it's a 3,000-year-old volcanic lava flow, or at least there was lava flowing there 3,000 years ago. And now it's just this really cool kind of flat area, super, super flat. There's one photo that I'll show you in just a second where there's kind of a gorge where the lava used to flow. But this is the same thing, just kind of playing around with the different color channels. All this kind of sagebrush is very kind of tan and light yellow. So kind of working to bring up all those patterns and then playing off all the kind of organic shapes of the rocks and the vegetation. This is the gorge that the lava flow kind of went through. Everything's kind of flat, and then you just basically walk up onto this gorge. The rock is very, very slippery around there, but it was an amazing time. And in the background, those are the Sierra Nevadas. In the background, this is looking west, kind of looking, I guess, southwest. This is not a black and white image, but I really like the lack of color in it. This is sunrise along the eastern shore in a little town called Chincoteague, Virginia. And this is looking out onto Assateague. And if anybody has ever read Bisti of Chincoteague about the wild ponies on Assateague Island, you'll know where I'm at. This is right at sunrise, about 5:30 in the morning. If you're going to be a good landscape photographer, you need to get up for the sunrises, because that's when the best light is. I think everybody's probably heard of the golden hour and that nice kind of warm light. But I thought this was just amazing. I'm not a big fan of just, no clouds in the sky, big ball of, hot gas, sun going down. I like textures. I like a lot of clouds with sunsets and sunrises. But I just thought this was just kind of nice and moody and calm and kind of tranquil. I also tend, when I go out, to not be a good hiking companion or a companion to be with. I really get lost in what I'm doing. I find that I can concentrate more on finding images if I'm kind of on my own. I'm a firm believer that really good images, really interesting compositions don't reveal themselves unless you're patient. I think you have to be very, very patient to be a good photographer. You also have to be very, very observant to be a good photographer. And you also have to experiment, and that's what this was. This is taken with an iPhone. It was an app that I had recently got. It's called Slow Shutter Speed, and it basically, you can set your shutter speed to a half a second, all the way up to 3 seconds. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to kind of do some experimenting here with the waves. I just kind of handheld this and took probably 16, 17 different photos, and a couple of them turned out. I thought it was kind of fun, something to do that's just a little bit different. And I think the one thing that that this photo kind of shows is you don't need a super expensive DSLR camera to take great photos. You just need to be a creative viewer, somebody who just wants to go out and say, hey, what happens if I do this? What happens if I experiment and try this and do something a little bit different? And who knows what's going to happen? I mean, and I think that kind of philosophy flows evenly across any kind of visual field. Whether you're working with textiles, whether you're working with clay or wood or metal or fabric or ink or paint, whatever it is, just trying new things and seeing what happens is the best. This is also down in Assateague. This is called a shelf cloud. I was not out here very long. This storm blew in very, very quick and dumped a lot of rain and a lot of wind, but I needed to get this this photo, so I was out on the dock for 5 or 6 minutes, and I think I maybe took 6 or 7 photos before the skies opened up. This is a really recent photo. I took this just last week. This is in a sunflower field. There's a wildlife management area near us called McKee-Besher Wildlife Area, and it's literally about 20-30 acres of just sunflowers. This is late in the day. This is probably around 6-7 o'clock in the evening. I'm actually, this is shooting to the east with all the sun, and I brought a ladder with me because I thought sunflowers are usually 6-7 feet tall. I want to get over the top, so I brought a 5-foot ladder with me. A lot of people were very, very envious, looking around saying, I want your ladder. But I loved like all these geometric shapes of the sunflowers, and I knew instantly when I took this photo that I was going to turn it into black and white to kind of play off all these circles inside circles inside circles, and again really messed around with some of the green channels and the yellow channels to kind of get those really nice sunflower heads to pop out. This is a winter photo. This is just kind of playing off a blank canvas, not a lot of color, but playing off all the textures of the trees in the woods. This is up near Layton, George Childs Park. If anybody hasn't been there, it's just over the river. Beautiful place to go, wonderful waterfalls. This is a long exposure. This is probably a 2 or 3 second exposure with a +2 gradient filter, not a gradient filter, a neutral density filter over the front of the lens so I can get a longer exposure out of it. This is also, the last few that I have up here are around the Peters Valley area. And this is the places that if I was teaching, this is where we would be going. This is just a wonderful field of wildflowers that is fun to take photos of. Again, 5-foot ladder just to get myself a better perspective up in the air. And I'm trying to figure, there we go. This is up on Thunder Mountain where the photo studio used to be. Super, super calm morning and just playing off the reflections of the light that day. I don't normally put my horizon line right in the middle, but I really liked the reflection here on a gray day. Same with this. This is also up on Thunder Mountain. Nice calm morning before class start. And I think the last image I have, this has nothing to do with photography, but I wanted to end on this just to show that us visual people, we have other skills too. And this was an addition, a little entryway that I put on the side of my house. All the wood is reclaimed wood. The walls are pallet wood that I got from a flower nursery. And Dave's gonna like this. The floor is legitimate 2 by 12 by 12 oak boards that somebody was selling. They're from a 70-year-old horse stall barn, and they're 12 foot long, 2 inches thick, 12 inches wide, and they were selling them for 15 bucks. I spent about 3 days cleaning them, power washing them, but I couldn't go wrong. Thank you guys very much. I got 20 seconds. If anybody wants to follow me on Instagram, there's my contact info for Instagram. Thank you guys very much. Hopefully next year, let's cross our fingers, we're all going to be up there in person.
Oh, thank you so much, Tim. Your work is so poetic. It's lovely. Thanks for joining us tonight.
There's my ducks are quacking. That means my time is up.
With great pleasure, I want to introduce our next guest, Mr. Bruce Dehnert. Bruce received his MFA from Alfred University in New York, a member of the International Academy of Ceramics. He teaches at various art organizations worldwide. His work can be found in many national and international collections, including the White House. Dehnert has written numerous articles and co-authored the book Simon Leach, A Pottery Handbook. He recently led wood firing workshops in Japan, India, and the US, amongst others, and is currently head of ceramics right here at Peters Valley School of Craft. Welcome, Bruce Dehnert.
Hi, everybody. I want to say, first of all, I'm so sad that we can't be teaching together. And this week, I always look forward to meeting the other instructors and working with them. Coincidentally, James Viste and I taught around the same time last year, and we had such a great time. It was at Oxbow out in Michigan, and I was really looking forward to being able to spend time with him and also to teach with the other instructors who have just shown fantastic work. This is where I grew up. And
I'm so sorry to interrupt. You're actually not screen sharing yet.
Oh. We'll sort that out. Sorry about that. Do you see that, Lakota?
No, not yet.
This is going to happen.
Awesome. We can see it now. Thank you.
It's just my name anyway. Welcome, everybody. Hey, thanks. My work is autobiographical, and I make pots, I make sculpture. And this workshop, the Onagama, making for the Onagama, which was supposed to start tonight, is a 4-day workshop, and then it leads into loading and firing the Onagama. And the Onagama is a large 65-foot long wood-fired kiln here that was built in 1980. And this would have been the first year that I would have been leading the workshop since I started here 20 years ago. And so next week is the firing workshop. And so just to let all of you know that I'll be, in my presentation, I'm going to be presenting a variety of people who I've had the pleasure and the honor of firing with during those 20 years. But tonight's presentation is going to be more about the making and what I think about in terms of my own work and the fabrication of it. So as I was saying, my work tends to be autobiographical, whether it is functional work or whether it is sculptural work. But I'm in two very different brains when I'm working those two different ways. So, but at the very fundamental level, I bring my background into my work, or at least I try to. And that has to do with where I was born and raised, and that is out in the West. And this is looking towards my hometown in Wyoming. This is about 15 miles away. This is Red Canyon. The mountains to the left and slightly out of view are Wyoming's tallest mountains, reaching up to around 14,000 feet. And those are granite, but they give away to this alluvial kind of a limestone, sandstone plain. And to the back of me here in the photograph is the Great American Red Desert, which is one of the world's largest deserts. So that rock, as you notice, is red, and it's loaded with iron, even though it's limestone. So I try to, in my work, I try to bring something of that place to my work. My father was an architect and my mother was a journalist. My mother made trouble, and my father made really great places for people to live or go to school or whatever. He dealt with large projects, small projects. And my work is, I try to have a dialogue with my father in my work, whether it's in my pots or whether it's in my sculpture. This is one of his buildings at the University of Wyoming. It's called the Arena. It is where they play basketball, volleyball, and rock concerts. So one of the amazing things about that space that I think you might be able to just feel on kind of a visceral level is the audio quality. So whether you're attending a basketball game or whether you're attending a rock concert, the audio, the sound inside that space is just phenomenal. And in a really kind of interesting sort of way, I think that he probably designed his spaces as much about comfort and how the body interacts with the space, but also the way the eyes and the ears interact with the space. So I try to bring something of that into my work, and so the first few slides are just going to be about my sculptural work. So this is an installation that I made in New Zealand, where I lived for a long time, and one of the fantastic things about New Zealand is that the environment there is so dynamic. You have glaciers that move down into and crush palm trees, and it crushes flowers, rhododendrons and roses, and it's just one of the most unique environments in the world. So with this installation going back to the 1990s, I tried to approximate some aspect of that dynamic of snow meeting subtropical or semi-tropical. It was also about love. It was about my love for Kulvinder, and it was also my love for architecture. So I chose my three favorite architects, Michael Graves, Ian Pei, and my father. And I built little mounts on the wall that were wood-fired, soda-fired, oxidation-fired, that were little vignettes, or they were motifs from all of those, from the architects who I just mentioned. And so that those became mounts for these roses or these flowers. And it was kind of a recyclable kind of project where the material that I would cut away from the mounts would then be kept in plastic bags and turned into flowers later. So there was this kind of a roundabout process to it. And so it was kind of an exercise in spontaneity and responding to the material and responding to architectural motif and so forth. These are a couple of sculptures that I did in my early time here at Peters Valley. They are based on memory. Onagama firing is very, very much about memory. That's the way that I view the process. The flow of the gases through the kiln, the flow of the ash through the kiln, the experience of firing, because it's always fired with a crew of people. So the fire creates memory on the work. And so I embarked upon a series of sculptures that were about my memory of sledding with my brothers and my sister, and I call these sledists. And we always kind of imagined ourselves to be somehow militaristic on these sleds and so forth, blasting through the Wyoming winter. And so I kind of viewed that as a way of using Onagama technique, whereas there is all this layering of process and layering of ash and so forth onto the surface of the work that kind of marks where I've been, where I'm going, and so forth. So this piece here is a more recent sculpture, and my struggle with my pots throughout my time as a potter has been trying to find that dialogue with my father in my pots. In the sculpture, it's not so difficult. And so I use a lot of my dad's motifs from his buildings. He was one of the early practitioners of solar energy and also rammed earth and so forth. And so I've always tried to look at his work and try to bring that into the sculpture. But with the pots, it was something that was very difficult until this exercise. And this exercise had to do with the Greek calyx. And it was a project that Melaine Syracuse, who is on the board of directors here at Peters Valley, came up with a number of years ago, and asked artists from different materials to respond to the calyx. And so I did that. And it was with this piece that I was able to start to imagine how I might bring architecture into the pots as well. This is an ingot. So the ingot has geometric aspects to it, but it also has autobiographical aspects. So it has a little bit of religion in there. It has the wood firing aspect to it and so forth. This piece called Tiger Lily. These are all fired in the Onagama, by the way. And this pot here was up in the back of the kiln, and it was inspired by another one of my favorite architects, Frank Gehry. So as I was saying, my dad does solar power in his buildings, and the angles of his buildings are very unique to that latitude of Wyoming where he practiced as an architect. So I have a real love affair with certain angles. And so when I'm making my work, I'm constantly thinking about the way that he might draw attention to different ways of perceiving the piece, different perspectives, and how those might relate to his blueprints. So I use real fine line to do that. To draw attention to that. These pieces that you're going to see now we're just going to show up in Saratoga Springs and have come out of Onagama and also oxidation firing. So by oxidation firings, I mean electric firing. So I'll fire in a wood kiln. This was in about the middle of the Onagama just last year. And then after the wood firing, I sand it all down and clean it up. And then I go back in and I glaze with low temperature glazes, cone 6 or lower temperature in electric kiln. So the bottom part of that piece is fired in the Onagama, and the upper part of it is refired into cone 6 electric, and playing around with those angles. This is a piece that I made in Oxbow last year out in Michigan. And whenever I travel to teach workshops or do residencies, I try to use as local a clay as I possibly can in my work. And that's something that really interests me, is using something that is of the place. And so this is clay that is produced out in the Michigan area. This is work that I made in Mendocino, California this past year. Or last year, and just playing around with getting those angles and getting those pieces of or those shapes that one might find in my father's buildings, and getting those into a vessel form. And that has been a real challenge for me, but a really interesting one. This is also Mendocino. This piece I made in India this past year, so you can see the difference in the color of the clay and also the color of the surface there. This is a Peters Valley clay body using some local materials from around the northwestern New Jersey area. And this one is also an India piece. So this clay body that I use came from where I was teaching the workshop down in Pondicherry, which is the southeastern coast of India. And trying to use a little bit of the iconography, but of southern India, Tamil Nadu area, but I I don't want to have things specifically about a different culture. I really want to try to maintain my American culture with this. So it's a real challenge, you know, that's a super challenge to keep things abstracted and away from the original inspiration and thereby, I don't know, thereby creating something for myself and about myself. So, and the white areas on that piece, of course, are fired later. This is from a Onagama 2 years ago. This piece I call Riverbed, and it's using a fire clay that is out of Ohio, but then also adding some of the local material into the clay. And this was fired in the Borigama. This piece is, technically it's a stoneware and it's about 18 inches long. So when I build my piece, I start with those bases with a big chunk of clay, 4 inches, 5 inches, 6 inches thick, and then I carve into it with a wire and flip it upside down and start building from there, thinking about my dad's architecture and other people's architecture. I like the coming and going of those slabs. They are slab built, and I like to work pretty spontaneously. This is called ledge. So this is shifting volume or the aspect of container away from the floor a little bit. So I have the floor of the piece, but then instead of just coming right out of the as a right angle or whatever from the floor, I shift it over. So it's just experiment. This is from a workshop I taught in Japan 2 years ago. This is Shigaraki clay, which is a very, very special clay. And it fired in an Onagama there in Sasayama. This is a piece that I built this year out of clay body here at Peters Valley. And the floor of that piece, as you can see, is a low temperature glaze. When I do refiring, I tend to find that if I fire the kiln in just the right sort of way, it actually ups the amps of the wood firing. It brightens it. It also melts it into the surface, into the clay a little bit. So that's really interesting to me. This is a porcelain clay body that was fired here at Peters Valley in the Onagama. And the last couple pieces are actually oxidation fired. So these are built out of porcelain, but they are glazed with a number of variations of the same glaze. So I spray a layer, add a little bit of oxide to it, spray another layer, add a little oxide. So this is sprayed with maybe 6, 7 different glazes, all of the same quality there. I like the softness of the glaze, so that the way that it breaks on the edges and so forth, it kind of points out the structure of the piece. And this piece is based on my family and I. We're all like swimmers, so this is kind of based on a story of being on a diving board and being a little afraid to go into the water. So this is about swimming, but you might not ever know that. I'm not so interested in viewers really knowing what the stories are behind the work. I'm not into hyperreality or whatever, but that's where I get started. That's what helps inspire my next piece is thinking about a story and then converting that over into a more obscure, abstract thing. So thank you very much. Thank you for joining us, everybody. And I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Gosh, what an honor it's been to explore this story and narrative. It's beautiful. So our final, last but not least, presenter is, is Mr. David Friedlich. Donald Friedlich. I'm sorry. Donald Friedlich received his BFA from Rhode Island School of Design and served a term as president of the Society of North American Goldsmiths. He has lectured at conferences and universities and taught workshops internationally. In 2016, he was the keynote speaker at the SNAG conference in Asheville, North Carolina, and was a Renwick Alliance Distinguished Artist Speaker at the Smithsonian. His work is in the permanent collection of Smithsonian American Art Museum, the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, and the Corning Museum of Glass, amongst others. Welcome, Donald. Great to see you.
Great to see you. All these great lectures make me even sadder not to be able to be there in person, but hopefully next summer things will be better. I call my lecture Things That Make My Heart Beat Faster. And artistic approaches vary widely, but I think of mine as one of discernment, of finding the things that excite me visually, intellectually, and emotionally, and then try to understand why they excite me. And that's what I call things that make my heart beat faster, and then try to bring those qualities into my work. I grew up in what could now be called the Soprano section of New Jersey, and as a child, I had no interest in art whatsoever. It wasn't until my early 20s when I met a jeweler skiing in Stowe, Vermont, and she started to teach me that I found a creative side. Eventually, I ended up at the University of Vermont and taking all kinds of art classes and other things. And after a few years there, I kind of exhausted their limited offerings, and I transferred to Rhode Island School of Design in 1979 and got my BFA in 1982. At RISD, I got interested in alternative materials. Glass artist Dale Chihuly was our professional practices teacher, which was great. He said to apply our creativity, not just to our art, but to our marketing, our presentation, and our life. I got fascinated with a book of traditional Japanese wrapping and packaging called How to Wrap 5 More Eggs, and tried to bring some of those wrapping ideas into my work. I also love Japanese gardens. I found a piece of slate, and that became an important change in my work. Trying to make stable geometric forms and interfering in that stability in some ways, forcing these geological forms apart. Dale said in photography, look for the 2 eyes, information and impact. And this slide is here to emphasize the importance of quality photography. So I'm going to go back to that. At this point, I got out of school. I set 2 primary goals. The first was to make a living at my work, and the second was to continue the artistic development that I found so satisfying in school. To do the first, I applied to the 3 leading craft shows in the country, and to do the second, I sent portfolios to the 3 leading galleries in the country. And I was very fortunate, and I got into all 3 craft shows, and I was taken on by all 3 galleries. But before I could do any of that, I needed to do something I hadn't done for 11 years. I had to get a haircut. The first thing that happened was I was in a new artist show at Artware Gallery in New York City. And the owner, Robert Lee Morris, asked me to do a collection of earrings based on these 2 designs that I'd done as a student, earrings and a necklace. And this became the basis of my production line. The class I was hoping to teach at Peters Valley is focused on production, which is an important part of my practice. These are sterling and selectively gold-plated. I also, living in Providence at the time, became fascinated with the jewelry industry. These little pins that I call clothespins are made through a commercial photo etching process. There's more design time in my least expensive work than anything else I make, probably the most important thing I'm going to say today. So they sort of fold up like paper dolls, and I sold thousands of these little things. Andy Goldsworthy said, it was very important when I discovered I could actually learn from making art. Instead of being a means of dumping my feelings or ideas, it acted as a kind of vehicle for getting information. I began traveling in the American Southwest and was just knocked out by the landscape, especially the effects of erosion on the stone. When I got back to my studio, I started working with the slate and sandblasting it, literally eroding away the material. I had an idea for a new material that was a lamination of sterling and 18-karat gold. And after a long search, found a manufacturer in the industry to make it for me. And this is a 18-karat sterling bimetal that's widely available now through Hauser and Miller and other sources. And they still get it from the same people I developed it with. So these earrings, the ones on the right, can pivot on the ear wire and be worn silver and gold or all gold. So the idea behind this is that it gave me the ability to work with gold, but closer to the price of the silver, because it's only 1/20th gold by weight. Noguchi, one of my favorite artists, said, "I love the use of stone because it's the most flexible and meaning impregnated material. The whole world is made of stone. It's nothing new. It's as old as the hills. It is our fundament." So my brooch here is slate and niobium and gold. I got interested in the interaction between jewelry and clothing and opening my pieces up and working with negative spaces. So the fabric kind of became part of the composition of the brooch. In production work, design decisions become lifestyle choices. So if you design a line of sterling jewelry that's high polish, you will spend your life polishing. I didn't want to do that. So in developing production, I literally knocked off my own one-of-a-kind work. I took a mold off the slate to get the texture and combined it with a bimetal that was also textured with roller printing with paper. And that became the next production line. And part of the thinking of this is that it connected aesthetically with my one-of-a-kind work, of course, but that surface is also very, very forgiving and very quick to finish. It just hit it with a brass brush and you're done. So, you know, what I always tell students is that it's slow to get to fast. If you're designing production, it takes time, and you put in the time on the front end, and then hopefully on the back end, the pieces are quick and easy to make. I wanted to bring color into my work and did some working with glass and also semi-precious stone. Here, a Brazilian agate. Noguchi said, speaking of his mentor, Brancusi, like the Japanese, would take the quintessence of nature and distill it. He taught me the truth of materials and to keep my sculptures undecorated like the Japanese house. I wanted to bring pattern into my work and started experimenting with glass. This is one piece of glass that I've carved over a piece of niobium that's been anodized. And this one too here on the top is black onyx that I've carved with a sandblaster. I found after working with the harder materials for a while, I really missed the slate. And I'd taught myself lapidary and gotten all this water-cooled lapidary equipment. And going back to the slate, it was just butter to work with after working with the harder materials. I knew Metalsmith magazine was working on a feature article for me, and I really wanted the cover. I'm the son of a New York ad man. If you ever watched that show Mad Men, my father was one of those guys running a New York ad agency during that same era. So being an ad man's son, I really wanted the cover. And so when we photographed these, two of my favorite pieces, we shot them as you see them, but we also shot them as verticals. So I knew the graphic designer's favorite trick was to take the name Metalsmith, pick up a color from a photograph, and drop out the name. And when the magazine came out, he did exactly what I was hoping he would do. Graduation may be the end of your schooling, but it's just the beginning of your education. I've been looking for several years to take a workshop with somebody from Europe at Haystack or Penland or Peters Valley or anywhere. And David Watkins from the Royal College of Art was teaching at Haystack for 3 weeks, and I took a class with him. And he had us do something for a grove of trees, and I did this little intervention between these two saplings, kind of a bad Andy Goldsworthy knockoff. And it was really fun to do, but I didn't think that much of it. But then when I got home, it immediately had an impact on my work, and I started working with more organic, soft forms. Stick-like forms. I collaborated with a German manufacturing company to work with precious and semi-precious stones. these in the series of pendants, and they're black onyx inlaid with diamonds set in 18 karat gold, and the bottom one is a man-made ruby, synthetic ruby inlaid with diamonds. I really still continue to like working with industry when I can. There's so much potential there, and a lot of it is unrealized. I did a little bit of playing with dichroic glass. These pieces act as almost like internally lit neon tubes. So why glass? In short, it's the most flexible material ever created. It can be clear, it can be transparent, it can be opaque as stone, it can be hundreds of colors. I began going to the studio of the Corning Museum of Glass in upstate New York in about 2000 to build a second set of skills. And going to Corning was hugely freeing artistically. The equipment was so much better than what I had. I was an artist in residence there for a month and had a glass blower to work with, and these forms came out of that. I wanted to make jewelry that that magnified the clothing that it was on, lens forms. And to do that, I needed to make graphite molds. Here, working on a milling machine at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And these are some of the pieces that came out. The next step was CAD/CAM, CNC machining graphite, looking at pieces that are inspired by water. I was an artist in residence at Kendall School of Art and spent 5 days there and spent half the time with the faculty and half the time with the students doing critiques, lectures, and demos, playing with their very cool high-tech toys. This is a hot shop session showing you how the press molding works for the glass. That's me with the gloves and the handle there. Hot glass is dripped into the mold like a honey dipper, 2000-degree glass. Cut off and then pressed into the graphite mold. I had an idea to do more organic pieces. These are literally lost celery casting and lost asparagus casting. Working with apples and other fruit. I love the idea of wearing a vegetable. This gives you an idea of process. I'm moving along because I'm tight on time. My butterfly pin. I'm going to skip right through some of this. This is working larger residency at Ouroboros and glass factory in Oregon, casting large pieces. After 2 weeks in the kiln. And this is current work, looking at Mark Rothko's paintings, Dan Flavin's light work, James Turrell's architectural work, working with a material I've always hated, dichroic glass. It was developed by NASA for the visors of the astronauts. Oh. And it's very garish, but through a soft surface, it diffuses it. So these are 3 views of the same pieces, and here as well. My wife and I love to travel. Our favorite trip was the Galapagos Islands. These turtles live a really long life, and we found out later this one was actually the grandfather of Senator Mitch McConnell. And you can totally see the resemblance. This is my home and studio in Madison, Wisconsin. The studio is the small light-colored building, and inside, half set up for goldsmithing and half set up for glass. And my final thought, the world is shaped by the activists, those that take the time to be involved to do the work. So whether you're in this field or another, I encourage you to try to make the world a little better. God knows it needs it right now. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Donald. I love your inspired approach to industry. It's stunning. Thank you so much. And that concludes our evening of presentations. So thank you to all of you who joined us from all over the world, literally. And before you head off into your evenings, mornings, afternoons, other times, could I just remind you to share the link with your friends and family, and so that we can create more, increase this community that we've got going on online. It helps us with our fundraising efforts. And also, if you could leave a note in the chat as to your location. We don't share that with anybody. That also helps us fundraise. And as Donald was saying, we need positive things like art making, appreciation of art, creative thinking to help us move forward this kind of challenging time. So be well, everyone, and stay safe. And we look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you. Good night.